Hey there, Stephaniers. Again, apologize about the name if I am saying that incorrectly. Let me keep this up. I mean, I did a whole series on problems I have with democracy, and I do refer you to that series. But I will try and sum up in brief at least most of the problems I have. And these aren't problems that I thought up myself. Most of them I read other places, and even the ones I thought up myself, I later found out I hadn't. But um, yeah, there's a gerrymandering problem, and there is a uh, an an incentive problem to vote. And on top of it, there's no basis for um, just assuming that it's going to have good decision making, morally, ethically, or practically. So I don't think you can just take that for granted, which I'm sorry to say, but it just seems like so many socialists just do, that as long as there's voting taking place, that we should be satisfied, and that's all we need to worry about. This is not true. Uh, Now some socialists know this, and they basically go along the socialist route, or the USSR route, or the Chinese route, or basically every socialist country route, which is you have an oligarchy who's really running the show, and just like democracy everywhere else, the voting is just a pretensive way to say that they're legitimate, which is all democracy ever really was, ever is, and ever could be, to be perfectly honest. The second problem, well, I don't know if it's the second or not. Another problem I'll say is I don't like some of the stuff it's predicated on, namely egalitarianism. Um, Egalitarianism to me seems extremely absurd. Nobody is equal in any physical trait. We're different sizes. We have different upbringings, even identical twins. And as far as I'm aware, actually, identical twins are not physically identical. But even assuming that you had two individuals who were indistinguishable physically, they cannot occupy the same space at the same time. They have a fundamentally different experience and perspective on the world than each other. So even if they were identical, they would be different. They would have different uh, points of reference to the universe, and the further they got from the womb, and even within the womb, the less similar they would become. Uh, this being the case, egalitarianism, to be normative, to actually be meaningful, would have to address all this. I mean, we can talk about everyone getting paid the same wage, everyone getting one vote, but the bottom line is some people are going to still be jealous and upset because other people are going to be taller or better looking or have bigger cocks or bigger breasts or whatever. And you have to start talking about, cutting people's legs off or making them look the same. I mean, egalitarianism, if it's really ethically called for, really demands uniformity in everything possible. And if there are things that it's impossible to achieve this in, then that's a big problem. Then it can't be consistently applied. Secondly, when it comes to voting or decision making, basically, which is voting is just an attempt to, a way to arrive at decision making. People don't have equal interest in an event. They may not know as much. They may be disinterested. If you have people who really don't care about a topic, why should they have the same vote as somebody who's really interested in it, who's really directly affected? People are affected to varying degrees. And I've actually heard a number of socialists say, well, you should be able to vote to the proportion that you're affected. But who decides what the proportion you're affected is? Here again, this is similar to the gerrymandering problem. You can't vote on it because that's the issue. If we have 10 workers working at a co-op factory that produces, I don't know, hammers, they say, well, the vote is these 10 people every time, and they're equal shares. But what about the consumers of those hammers? They're also affected by this, correct? I mean, if they need a hammer, that's where they're getting it from. So how much do they get to vote? If they have 10 workers, but they have 1,000 people who are patronizing their hammer production, what do the consumers of the hammers, they get 1/1000th each? Do they get, do all of them put together only count for one? And depending on, or do they get half the vote of each? If they get half, they can outvote the producers. If they only get 1/10,000th, then they can't. And there's no objective scientific way to decide who is affected the most at all, because, well, here's something that socialists just, I've yet to find one who understood this. Interpersonal comparisons of utility are vain. This isn't just something only libertarian belief. Even Keynesians, even Marxist economists will admit this. If you and I both have access to a hammer, that does not mean the hammer is equally valuable to the two of us. And to the degree to it is not a calculation that we can done with math, because we don't use math in our head in that way. We value things ordinally, not cardinally. What does mean that? Excuse me. Like, well, I don't want to get into it too much, but we don't all value things the way, and value is subjective. I mean, this is not a controversial statement as far as economics is considered. And I know socialists have to disagree with this, because if value is subjective, then it is impossible for them to even pretend to coordinate the economy or make calculations or plan. It's literally impossible. Now, there are several so-called objective theories of value. All of them fail miserably. They're not scientific. They're not accepted by just about anybody. Most famous, obviously, is the labor theory of value, which, by the way, was not invented by Karl Marx. It was popularized, although not invented, by Adam Smith. And it's false. I know, since I'm a free market, I'm supposed to worship at the altar of Adam Smith. And although I do respect him and consider him an important figure, and he was right about a lot, he was dead wrong when it came to the labor theory of value, and this is not a controversial statement. And it hasn't been since the 1870s. In any event, since we can't decide how much people are value or how much they are affected by, there's no way to decide how much their votes should count. And so this makes it impossible to really come up with any kind of scientific electorate. And then the other thing, I keep hearing this statement. I don't know if you've ever made it, although I'm going to guess you've heard it, that one person, one vote. This is, aside from the fact that you wonder why somebody who doesn't care or who doesn't know should have the same voice as somebody who does care and does know, in practically speaking, it never happens that way, because people have influence over other people. For instance, if I have a room with lots of socialists in it and they're going to have a vote on some topic, and Noam Chomsky is in there and Noam Chomsky says how he's going to vote, I can guarantee that at least some of the socialists, and I would say probably a large number of them, are going to vote the way he does, because they respect him, because they're influenced by him. And I'm not saying he's evil or anything. I'm just saying this makes the whole idea that there's one person, one vote kind of silly, because he has more say than anybody else. And this is exactly what always happens in any electorate, and you can't deny this. Whenever there's an election, even the examples you might really like anarchist Spain or anarchist Ukraine or the Black Army, or always voting blocks develops. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a strictly hierarchical thing. I'm not saying the guys who are in charge are abusing their influence or anything like that, although that usually tends to be what happens. I'm just saying that the idea that everyone has an equal voice is silly, because some people are going to heed the voices of others more. And in elections, there's a tendency for the people who are the most manipulative and the best liars to have the most influence. If you can convince people to vote, not necessarily for you, because we don't have to have, this doesn't only apply to representative democracy, but for whatever program it is that you want, then you have an advantage over the more honest, straightforward person who is not manipulative, who doesn't excel in convincing others to do his bidding. And this is historically so prevalent. I won't say it happens every time, but it is so close to that that I don't think you can just take it for granted that, oh, we're all just going to become really, this is weird, really individualistic and really vote with our own conscience and not be influenced by others. You know, because that's the position you'd have to take to say that everyone, you know, really has one vote, one person, one vote, and it's such a fantasy. And it would be one thing if you said, well, yeah, there's a problem, but I still want to go. But you just take it for granted. I apologize for use of that pronoun because maybe you don't. Maybe your view of democracy and socialism is way different, and I'm totally wrong, and it's possible. But I'd like to hear what your stance really is then, because I see these as pretty much insoluble problems. At least with the concept that democracy is this magical panacea solvent. And maybe you don't think it's a panacea, but if you are always referring to it as the solution to everything, then that's pretty close to a panacea. So there are big problems with democracy. I haven't even touched on all of them. And so to just say, well, socialism is okay because socialism is basically democracy, it's extremely problematic and not convincing. I mean, these are problems that we need to address before you can even think, oh yeah, this is a system that we might consider. And I realize that at this point I'm making a negative case against socialism and democracy and not making a positive case for free markets. I'm very comfortable doing that. That would be an even longer video. And if this dialogue goes anywhere, I'd be happy to do that. But I just raise these issues and I just say that, I mean, oh, and then there's this other thing, this new socialist man. You know, ever since the incentive problem and before, I mean, this is in Plato basically even, there's been this idea that, well, this society wouldn't work with humanity as is, but it would work with, you know, the Superman, the Übermensch, the new socialist man, who has different incentives, who's altruistic. Oh, that's the other thing, altruism. Let's not get into that right now, though. Who's selfless, which of course is consistently applied as a suicidal position to take. There's a couple problems with this. A, it's never been done. There's no evidence how it could be. You could say, well, we'll use social engineering, but that's not enough. That's like saying I'm going to build the USS Enterprise with a warp drive, and I'm just going to use engineering. No, that's not how you do it. You need to have a more concrete plan than that. You know. B, it doesn't make sense. Why would we re-engineer society and then re-engineer the man to make that society work? Why wouldn't we just re-engineer man to make it so that man works with our current society? You know, if we have a mixed corporatist, fascist society right now, which I would say that we do, why change the society and then engineer the man? Why wouldn't we just say, well, let's make it so that man is optimally suited to work in a corporatist, fascist, mixed economy like we have? You know, in which case, you know, like ants. Ants live in, well, it's not fascist because they're not ruled over another ant, but you know, they're automatons. They don't have any individuality whatsoever. And do we bemoan this? No, because ants are naturally like that. So if we just changed man to be naturally like what we have now, then we're saving the step. Why change society and then alter the man when we could just alter the man? Which, again, there's no evidence that he can do that. It's never been done. And even if it could, I mean, isn't that really putting a lot of trust in the social engineers? Again, that they'd be able to alter the nature of man, but they do it for the good of everyone else and not themselves. That strikes me as a little naive, but maybe you think of it differently. And then you're getting the chicken before the egg. Well, once the man is better, then he won't do that. Well, but that's you can't have the new socialist man to precede the creation of the new socialist man. So anyway, I think I'm going to call that good for now. But let me know what you think.